Okay, so you can go right to the PowerPoint and I will speak over that. I think that'll be fine. So the way that I teach and my passion is always about images and the power of images. And I'll just say that this wonderful image is a work of art that my sister Vicky, who's also on the faculty of our training, did. And she did, um, it was coming from an imagery experience that she had. And it's just such a beautiful, lovely piece. So So it's transpersonal nursing. And the concept of transpersonal is such a huge, huge thing. So and we can start, there'll be a little bit of writing on each slide. So Deb, you can go to the next one. Okay. And I feel so passionate about the dire need at this point to have us all being open and experiencing the wholeness of who we are and what we do, and that the transpersonal and the imagination and creativity are more important now than any other time, just because there was never a time in human history when we knew as much as we do now about the entire planet, about the universe. I mean, I was at a planetarium the other day, just lying back, and they were saying, oh, these stars, those are about 10 million light years away. And I'm going, and I was thinking, just feeling like in a totally transformed space by just taking in the knowledge of that, and that there are people who are studying this, which is amazing. And this beautiful photograph image was done, is created. We use his work. His name is Don Ring, and he went to high school with my husband Richard, and after that he became a minister and a theologian, and he worked for years and years and traveled all over the world because he was so passionately engaged in wanting to understand all of the different traditions of spirituality. And then when he retired, he is a phenomenal photographer, and his church became nature. And he lives in a beautiful nature setting. And all of his time, he's creating amazing photographs. And this is just, this is from a long time ago. So he's been doing it for over a decade now. So this is Don Ring's image of, this is his church. Okay, so we can go to the next. So my beginning of transpersonal nursing, well, I didn't start out as a nursing major when I was originally in college. First, I was an art history major, and I was also interested in anthropology. And I had been very interested in meditation and different traditions. And then I lived in an extremely mixed ethnic community and all different kinds of people. And I was fascinated by it. And I was working in, on a psych unit. This was when I finally went to nursing. Oh, I went into nursing because I had an aunt who was a public health nurse, and she was getting her PhD at Columbia. And she said, Bonnie, she said, I think you'd really love it because I work with all different kinds of people. She was going to Columbia. She said, all different traditions, all different ethnicities. And it's really a way to bring your passion about this into a professional role. And so I went and got my degree in nursing. And my first job was working on a head and neck floor, which talk about reality shock when you first come out of nursing school, because I had these intensely, just tragic patients. And I was working night shift, and I had the amazing experience of having the night supervisor at the hospital I was working at was Kathy Fanslow. And Kathy Fanslow was an amazing nurse who was a pioneer in creating the concept of a hospice unit. And in my, actually, I had met her in my undergraduate class where she came in and spoke to, it was a big class, and she was coming to talk about that what it's going to mean to be working with death and dying. And she had she spoke to us as a group, and she said, I just want you to all close your eyes for a minute and just reconnect with your earliest thought that you might become a nurse. And then she let us, this is in my undergraduate class, and she said, okay, I'm going to be quiet, and I'll even invite you, just take a moment, just close your eyes, and perhaps there's an image of something or a memory. And I'm going to make this very brief. She said, when after we had done this for a while, she said, okay, she said, please let me know what your experiences were. And it was very striking that a lot of the class, people were raising their hands and say, well, my brother was very, very sick when I was little. And how many people I would say the majority of the students had a memory of some kind of tragic, traumatic thing, and they hadn't made that direct connection as to why they were becoming nurses. And Kathy said, I just want you to know that my experience in working with nurses forever, such a long time, that so many of us have a place in our past or moment where there was something that we were struggling with, and maybe we don't even think about it, but that's probably part of why you're here doing this work and studying right now. We know nursing undergraduate work is very difficult. It's not much harder than any other clinical area, and it's even been documented. So then I was working on a psych unit, and after I had been on that, I'll just take one step back. Kathy was the night supervisor, and I was working with this young nun, and she was dying. And, working nights, you had a lot more time to spend with the patients who couldn't sleep. And I was just so moved by her, and she was so sweet. And she really felt that she only had a couple of days left. And then I remember I had to leave the room, and I called Kathy. I said, Kathy, could you come down? I really need help. I don't know what to do. I feel so upset about this lovely young woman. And she's a nun, but she feels like she's so estranged, and it's not helping her. And so Kathy sat with me. She said, okay, so this is what I want you to do. I want you to go into the room with her and just be present with her in your kind way and ask her, what is she hoping for? And I said, Kathy, she doesn't want to die. And she said, I didn't say that. I said, ask her what she's hoping for, because no matter where you are at any point in your life, there's always a part of you that's hoping for something. So that was an amazing thing. And I had to really calm myself. And then I went back into the room with her, and, and I was holding her hand, and, I was helping her to breathe and relax. And I said, so just take a moment and ask, what am I hoping for? And I had to say, I felt really weird saying it. And then she was quiet for the longest time. And then she said, it's so important that you asked me that because I realize that I have to see, and she named a family member, a young family member. She said, I really, really have such a need to say goodbye to him. And if there's any way I could have this person come here, it would give me a lot of peace because I need to say goodbye. So that was an incredible education for me about consciousness, about love, about trust that people at the deepest level, in the most vulnerable moments of their life, do have some wisdom and peace that's available to them at that deep level. So then I was working on a psych unit, which was days, which was a big improvement from midnight to 8. And I was very fortunate that I had this guy who was a nursing aide. He was great, and we both were very interested. He was also an artist and interested in meditation, and we were working on. And this was a private unit, so it wasn't like a massive hospital, psychiatric hospital. It was, and I was doing, it was primary care, so I had people I met with, for an hour each time. And I had there were so many conflicts that were coming up in terms of what, back at that time, being homosexual was a disease. It had a diagnosis, and thank God years later that was changed. But I remember my first primary was a young 16-year-old young woman, and she said she was gay, but she didn't use that language. But she said, but her parents had her hospitalized because they felt there was something wrong with her. And so we did these long sessions together. And I had grown up, I had grown up going to Greenwich Village all the time. And it was like totally something I was familiar with. And she said, do you think I'm crazy? Do you think I'm sick? I said, no. I said, so I helped her with that, to be at peace with who she was. And I said, eventually you're going to be able to be who you are, and just allow yourself to realize that this was so traumatizing to her that it was being diagnosed as a disease. But that was another moment of being appreciative of her capacity to transcend what was being imposed on her. And then the other thing that was amazing, and I have to say, Mildred, the unit clerk, she was totally on board with Jerry and I about talking about meditation and stuff. And then we had this patient who came in, and she was admitted as being psychotic. And she was a young single mom, and she was an artist, and she did this wild art. It was multi different kinds of things, but it was non-representative. It was all angles and abstractions and all of that. And then she was starting to have difficulty sleeping at night. And so someone got her committed to the hospital, and someone, I don't know who had her child, but she was, I had spent time with her. She was, again, one of my primaries. And I spent time talking to her, and I had her talk about her artwork. She had all these pictures, and she was saying, well, these are all these lines, they're crossing, and it's all about the connection of things, and how it's not just a person out there. We're all connected with everything. And then she tells me that she's practicing Sufism. And she was going to a Sufi group, and they were doing this kind of meditations, and the Sufi art in that it's not representational. It's Islamic art, like Jewish art. They're not supposed to draw pictures of God, and that it's all symbolic. And she had also been doing some Sufi dancing with this group. And and then she was having these experiences. And Jerry and I said, she's not psychotic. She's having like major mystical experiences from her Sufi practice. And unfortunately, where she's going, there's no one there to help her to bring her back down. So she would be leaving this group and then finally getting home and still having these whirling experiences. And we, fortunately, because the people on the unit, they all had a private psychiatrist. And so Jerry and I said, we're going to go talk to him, okay? So we, without giving his name, he was actually from London. And Jerry and I said, Dr. So-and-so, she's not psychotic. She's having mystical experiences. She's doing this practice that is very powerful. And not only that, it's filling her mind with images that she's putting on paper. And if you look at that art form, it's non-representational. It's not like she's psychotic because she's not drawing people. And I have to say, we were saying, is he going to think we're crazy? But he was from London and he had a great love of art. And he said, you know, what you're saying makes sense. He said, I really appreciate it. This is the psychiatrist. And he said, I know about that kind of art. I've seen it in museums. And if you look at what she's been doing, she's been functioning well for years. You don't just all of a sudden wake up psychotic like that. And he worked with her and he got her to, she was discharged. He helped her to understand that she needed to come down from these mystical experiences, and she was discharged. So then Mildred, the unit clerk, says, Bonney and Jerry, you got to meet my brother-in-law. He's studying this thing. It's a kind of a psychiatry. He's a psychiatrist who believes in imagery and meditation. And I said, oh, really? I've never heard of it. And he said, well, it's called psychosynthesis. And I said, really? And I learned about Asa Jolie, who grew up in Florence, he had started to develop psychosynthesis in 1910. And he was someone who had been a doctor in World War I, came back majorly traumatized from the experience. And then over the years, he was fascinated by, he was amazingly multilingual. So he was corresponding with people around the world who were like Martin Buber and Tagore, from different traditions, because he wanted to understand all of that, because he had this very strong practice of meditation and interest in mysticism. And he was bringing that into his work and the way that he was working with his patients. Unfortunately, he died before we learned of his work. But what was fascinating is that he had had major traumas in his life. First of all, he was born in the ghetto in Venice, and his mother was a theosophist, but his father was Jewish. But so he had that in his background, but then he wasn't observant in that way. And his mother taught him to meditate at a very early age. And that's what helped him through the trauma. And then she married someone and they moved to Florence. And that was where he began to develop his work. And then as Mussolini was coming into power, the fact that he was corresponding with people all over the world was evidence to them that he was he needed that he was doing bad things and he wasn't following the Nazi trade. So he was imprisoned. He was thrown to jail because he was interested in all of these different things. So that was his second trauma. And interestingly enough, we'll go to the next slide. Richard and I in the 80s were able to, we had learned about it and we went to Florence and visited his home. And this was after he had died, and this is a sculpture of him. And then we went into his, they call it a studio in Italy. And all those boxes that you see up there, those are all boxes of notes that he made based on his meditation experiences and thoughts that he had. And, it was back in the day, he didn't have a typewriter and a computer summit. And he did a lot of his writing in English because he was mostly fluent in English, and he felt like it was the most universal language, that it was something that would allow him to communicate with more people, even though he had taught himself to speak other languages. He spoke German and he learned some Hindu language too. Okay, so this was an amazing experience. And what was also fascinating, given the fact that he was a medical professor and teaching at the university and in charge of psychiatry at the hospital, his library was full of philosophy books and different poetry and art. And in reading his notes, because we had some case notes without names, we learned that one of the things that he did to help, these were his outpatients, not the ones in the hospital. One of the things that he felt was very helpful to them in terms of their healing was to meditate on art and on the beauty that was surrounding them. And that was really amazing to learn how he was able to use art. Even you didn't have to be Catholic to go and look at this art and be in awe of it. And so that was fascinating to us also. And he had so many statements like this that were just so beautiful. Okay, so you can go to the next image. And this was the house that we went to, and that was where he lived upstairs, and his studio, and he taught psychosynthesis downstairs. And this little scrap, these boxes were filled with little notes that he made to himself that, and so it's his handwriting and he's correcting it all. But that was such a wonderful statement. And we just copied so many of these notes because they were so beautiful. And it was an amazing experience. And in the previous slide, we don't need to go back to it, but one of the tragedies that he experienced as the fascists were coming into power in Italy was that after he was released from the prison, and he even had notes, we ended up writing an article about it. He said, actually being thrown in prison, they put him in solitary confinement because they didn't want him to be able to convert any of the other people into his way of thinking. He said, they gave me a wonderful chance to meditate. He said, I meditated, and he had all these notes about the meditation. And he said, they gave me the same thing to eat every day. He said, I didn't care. He said, I just wanted to have the peace. And then he was ultimately released. And after he was released, he found out that his son had tuberculosis. And they were living in the woods. They weren't living in this house at that time. They were escaped and living in the woods. And he had originally studied psychoanalysis with Freud very briefly, but he met Jung, and Jung lived in Switzerland, and he was getting in touch with Jung and seeing, is there any way that I can get my son into Switzerland to get medical care? We can't get any medical care here. He's so sick. And Jung wasn't able to do that. And then his son died. So interestingly, and it was so touching. Um, One of the books, he made lots of notes in his books that he was reading. And he had a book that was written by Anne Morrow Lindbergh, who was the wife of Lindbergh, and it was the first famous incident of a kidnapping of the child of someone famous. And the people who kidnapped their baby killed him. And so she wrote a book. She wrote a number of books on poetry as a way of trying to process her experience. And she had a lot of words about grief. And he had all these notes written in her books, commenting on her expressions of her grief and pain from the loss of her child. So it was quite a fascinating thing to experience, being able to, it gave such meaning and gravitas to what he was teaching about the possibility of rising up above the suffering and pain and connecting with the highest power. And he included everything as saying the higher power is an essence that's in us, and that's the essence of healing. Okay, so the next thing that was really, really amazing was, we talk about this a little bit in our imagery when we train about imagery, is that he was very fascinated to be working, particularly in the big hospital, with people who said that they had been in direct communication with God. And he was, all these people get labeled as psychotic and medicated, and they're being there. But he's coming from a perspective of saying, this doesn't have to be a disease. People have mystical experiences. They have experiences that are bigger than what's in this little brain that we have. And so he had a lot of notes about that. And it was so great because it was reflecting what Jerry and I had been experiencing working on the psychiatric unit back when there was no acknowledgement. I mean, to meditate was being considered like a disease. So, and he was such a pioneer in opening it, being expressive about it. Okay, so can go to the next slide. And we're going to connect with another person who was a mystic and a healer and an influencer in a big way. And she was a pioneer. She was from a wealthy family in London, where back in those days, girls weren't allowed to be educated. Literally, girls could not study math. It was forbidden, or science. They needed to learn how to cook and look nicely, and they could study culture so they could be interesting to talk to, but it was literally, and girls were not allowed to have a room of their own. So she fortunately had a father who recognized that she was brilliant in math, and she was able to get a tutor to teach her math. And that became a huge part of her knowledge, where she became a statistician and all of that. But you can go to the next. Here she is. This is incidentally Crimea. where people are being slaughtered today. And at that time, there was this war going on, and it was the Ottomans, the Turks, and the Russians, and the English. And at that time, the English guys joined the army because they had no money for anything, and they were going to get money to get paid. And they were all the number one cause of death in Crimea, and this was across the board, whether it was the Ottoman soldiers or the Russians or the English, was starvation and infection. There was no such thing as a hospital. The soldiers were all just left on the ground. And she created the idea of a hospital. And she brought people to learn to be nurses, to come and help. And one of the most touching things that she did was they were almost all illiterate. And she had her nurses promise that they would write down their last words and make sure that it was sent to their families. And that she promised them that no one would die alone. She promised that there would always be one of my nurses with you, holding your hand and making notes. And the other thing she promised was that the family would get paid. Because the other thing was that the British government never bothered, once they were dead, sending them the money. So she had multiple things going on here, right? She was the sociologist, she was the educator, and she was the angel who was helping this person to transition with some sense of peace, that their family was going to know about his loving words, and they weren't going to be brutalized by complete starvation and no money. So this is so many different aspects of what the beginning of nursing was. So go next. This is such a sweet picture. And you can see that was totally the culture that she grew up in. And you can go to the next. There wasn't a profession of nursing yet. It was kind of looked down on. And here she is, 1866, with her graduating class. And this beautiful quote: people talk about imitating Christ and imitate him in little trifling formal things, such as washing the feet, saying his prayer, and so on. But if anyone attempts the real imitation of him, there are no bounds to the outcry with which the presumption of that person is condemned. So, timely statement. And such an amazing thing. I mean, there weren't nursing schools before. This was new. Okay, next. And this is another quote from Florence. And I have to say that my cat is the best meditator you would ever want to see in your life. Okay. She can just sit and meditate for an hour and be at complete peace. So I love this quote: I must strive to see only God in my friends and God in my cat. And we need to also, I'm going to hurry with this, is talking about these evil cat ladies. In the 18th century, the symbol of a witch was a woman who owned a cat. And if you had a cat, they came and put you in jail, and they killed your cat. And then they would torture you until you confessed that you were a witch. But if you didn't confess, they burned you at the stake. And interestingly, one of the main places that they were doing that was in France, which surprised me. And then, they came over here and they did it too. But evidence of which is to own a cat. So, next. And this is such a beautiful image, the lady with the lamp, and you can see the connection that she's bringing, the light, the lamp, and the power of this amazing statement. And that's where the transpersonal is essential right now. Okay, next. And so thinking about the expanse of transpersonal experiences, you have to wonder all of like what is in the psyche and the consciousness of this person that they are willing to do this and just take this leap into the unknown. And you can say that this is someone seeking a very profound transpersonal experience in terms of going way beyond what is around us right now. So I have there are a couple of astronauts who obviously, this was the first time we saw what they called the big blue marble. And I'm sure that those pictures of the blue marble were something that really energized the environmental movement, because these astronauts were looking down and seeing these little tiny marble and the vastness of what we experience down here. So I look at this as this is one person's way of wanting to transcend the day-to-day experience. And just think of the courage that these people had. It's beyond belief. And one of the people, Edgar Mitchell, who was an astronaut and went to space in 1973, had a profound awareness of what we don't know, and came back to Earth and devoted himself to getting people together to explore the unknown. And he started an organization called the Institute of Noetic Science. And that was one person. And you're going to get a document with these things printed up, so you don't need to make the notes. And then one of the other astronauts on that had a very Christian experience where when he came back, he dedicated himself to go to Turkey and search for the Ark. And for years and years, they were going, I forgot the name of the mountain, but that's where Noah's Ark is from the Bible. And so here we have two individuals who are obviously incredibly brave and seeking something more and having profoundly different directions that it brings them in. And it's not like one person's right and one person's wrong. They're seekers. And that's the only way I can conceptualize what it takes to have the courage to do this. And we say that it's the nature of transpersonal experiences when we work with a patient and we get them into that place. There's experiences of awe, joy, expansiveness, energy, and all different cultures in every part of the world and time seek ways to help people to have that. Okay, so there's a quote that says, "In this search for answers to the mystery, science is the path." That's something Edgar Mitchell says. Science is the path to the mystery. Okay, so we can go to the next. And I love this image because this is Stonehenge. And Stonehenge is started around 3100 BC. That's when they think, and now there's more and more archaeology going on, and they think that there's stuff deeper and deeper and deeper in the earth and the mystery of what this means. And it seems to have some resonance to the solstice, the summer solstice, the way that the light comes between the rocks. And there's been an increased interest in paganism. And these are, and particularly with women who've rejected the masculine essence of so many traditions. And this is a group of pagan women, which is deep in, this is in the United Kingdom, and it's deep within the culture of Scotland and Ireland and England, the pagan traditions. And then, eventually the Romans came and tried to conquer, and they introduced, Christianity, but there were certain areas like that they never got that far. The Irish were able to keep them off, and they still maintained a lot of pagan beliefs and traditions. So the part of it that it was very increasingly popular is that it was built around the mysteries of nature and connecting with nature and light. And there were a lot of, one of the other things that convinced people that was proof that you were a witch, besides having a cat, is if you worked with herbs. And one of the worst things that you could do was try to make childbirth less horrible and painful by giving people, helping them and giving them herbs and all of that, because there actually was a belief that childbirth was painful because they were punishing Eve. Yeah. I mean, literally, that was in the belief system at the time. So women needed to suffer as much as possible to make up for what had happened. So, okay. And then here's some other, I'm going to just show you a whole bunch of different ways that traditions express their connection to their higher power, their wisdom. And we'll just go through them quickly. You can go to the next. Okay, this is water. And this is coming from a Latino tradition where it's very good to have water in your place, and it absorbs evil spirits and energies. And I first learned about this when I was working in a drug treatment program, and I had a caseload of patients, and I had been doing intakes, and I had a patient who was putting a dish of water in front of her doorway inside the house. And I happened to have had, there was a Latina graduate student who was studying psychology who was interning with me. And I was taking her through that. And I remember saying, I said, could you help me to understand the significance? I wasn't dismissive of the fact that this person wanted a dish of water in front of her door. And she explained that that's, especially she came from a very significant Latino American community up in Connecticut. She said, I can't tell you how many people put a dish in front of the water in front, because it drowns evil spirits. And she said, and it helps them to feel peaceful. And I said, that's great. So I'm not going to give that a diagnosis, right? I mean, you could imagine someone saying, oh yeah, well, this is totally delusional, blah, blah, blah. It works. If it helps them, it works. So that's an important thing when we work interculturally, that people have all different ways. Okay, and the next one. Okay, and this is a curandera. And this is someone in New Mexico, and the curanderas are healers, and they use it in the Latino culture, and it's primarily women. And they're folk healers, and they use herbs and amulets and energy. And this is their way of bringing in that culture, the idea of spirits and gods and energies like that to heal. Okay. So we can look at all of these different practices, whether we're going to go back to Asajoli and having him have people work with art, or Don being in nature and feeling that healing is energy. And there are all these different ways that we access and bring healing energy into our being. And it's wonderful if someone, I have been reading that there's a lot of, non-Latinos going to the Caranderas in New Mexico because it's about a beautiful energy. It's kind, it's gentle, and using herbs. And now, next, here she is. This is Dee Krieger. And Dee Krieger is the person who developed the concept of therapeutic touch. And it was interesting that she had a background. I mean, she was obviously a brilliant scientist and professor at NYU. That she totally believed, because of her interest in theosophy and meditation and energy work, that we could help people with energy of the hands. And when she was doing this, it was the beginning of holistic nursing. NYU was the first nursing program to integrate holistic concepts into it as energy. And what was so fascinating is that I had started with my Richard and colleagues the psychosynthesis training program in the West Village, which is right by NYU. And Dee was sending nurses to us because they were studying therapeutic touch, and she was very familiar with Asajoli and his perspective of energy and imagery and healing. And it was great. I mean, most of our students. And she wrote, she's the author of The Therapeutic Touch, Accepting Your Power to Heal, and Therapeutic Touch, The Inner Workbook. And she was Professor Emeritus. I love these images. Here she is, professor. And a couple of our students were actually doing research that was published, demonstrating that after the therapeutic touch experience, the patient's blood counts changed, and they had more red blood cells. Okay, I'm going to hurry up right now. Okay, I'm just going to go through a lot of different images. Okay, we see the Tai Chi, Qigong, the yoga, and these are all about energy fields, energy practices, and all so many different coming in so many different ways. And next, this was the Sufi, and we actually went to Istanbul and saw this, which is an amazing thing. And then next, there's a lot of traditions where dance and music are part of the ceremony. And this is Native American and the bell dancers. This is where the sound of the bells is part of it. Okay, next. Okay, and then there's the idea of sacred animals in different traditions. And there's the white buffalo, which is a very sacred image in Native culture. And if the white buffalo comes, it's the savior. And I had to put this one in because there's a lot of cultures where there are wise owls. Go to the next. This is Florence Nightingale's owl. I went to the Nightingale Museum in London. I took a bunch of pictures, and that she lived a very long life. She was sick when she came back from Crimea, and she was bedridden for years and decades. It did tons of work. And this was her little pet owl. And then when her owl died, she had it preserved. I just was so amazed that she had a pet owl. So I loved it. Okay, next. Okay, and then here he is, the master of energy. Okay, the resonance of this through all these different belief systems, right? Everything's energy, and that's all there is to it. Match that frequency of the reality, and you cannot help but get that reality. It can be no other way. This is not philosophy, this is physics. And one of the things that Assagioli had written in his early notes, because he was writing about energy, he said, I don't think that psychosynthesis is going to be accepted until maybe the 21st century, when they begin to understand energy better. So, okay. So this is great too. This little cartoon. Do you see this, guys? This is how energy practice is valuable on a day-to-day basis. Here's this guy at work. Everybody's screaming at him. He does a little bit of qigong. He comes back. They come back, and he's all relieved and relaxed. Okay. Everybody else is still fuming, and he's all happy. He knew how to calm himself. Okay, next. Okay, and this is just, you know, the light is in so many traditions a source of energy, and this is the Notre Dame Cathedral rose window. Okay, next. Okay, and again, this is another example of it's non-representational. This is a Quran, the cover of a Quran. I took that picture because it's a beautiful book that's in the Metropolitan Museum. Okay, next. And this is interesting too, because it's about how these traditions often are referring to things in the past. And this was a young Tibetan artist, and this was his tanka that he decided. He brought it up to date, guns, gas masks. And the write-up was like, stop locking me into the thousands of years ago. I live in the present time, and this is what I need to create. Okay, next. So, how did I develop tremendous confidence in the power of transpersonal? When I was first starting the Psychosynthesis Institute in the West Village, it was the beginning of AIDS. It was called gay cancer. They didn't know what it was. And I was getting a lot of nurses studying with us because there was nothing that could be done. And my colleague and I, we did these workshops, self-care for the caregivers, because the nurses were just totally devastated and overwhelmed and didn't have anything that they could do. And in the beginning, it was really terrible because it was overwhelmingly gay men, they were being persecuted terribly and ignored. And this little red thing is if you were working with AIDS patients, you had to wear that so no one would come near you and you were like isolated. Okay, so I'm going to skip a couple. Go to the next one, Deb. Here it is. Okay. So this is a picture of the AIDS quilt. There were years going by with no treatment at all. Everybody was dying or having horrible, horrible conditions. And these are people. See, and thousands of people made little patches and tied them together to make quilts to demonstrate, because there was no research. They were objecting to looking at it as its own condition. And this was something that was extraordinary. And it's massive, massive, massive thing. And it was created to emphasize the reality of what people were dealing with at the huge amount of suffering. And it was really an extraordinary time to be bringing this imagery type of work to the patients that we were working with, the nurses. It said, I'm trying to remember, well, it doesn't matter. It's huge. It was, yeah, I had something about the size of it, but that's not really important. The point is that if you weren't a new nurse at that period of time, it was overwhelming. And because I had been also working in a drug treatment program, we would be getting a couple of guys who they'd have all these nasty sores on their body, and they'd get them admitted. It would get better, then they'd get it again. And IV drug users were getting AIDS, and that was a Kaposi sarcoma, the skin cancer. That was one of the conditions. So Marguerite, and you'll be able to access this. Um, this this was in 1988. She wrote an article that was published in the Nursing Journal about how to deal with the overwhelming suffering of the AIDS patients, because I would say 90% of the people that I worked with weren't from New York. They had escaped from areas where they would have been totally ostracized and condemned for being gay. So they were dying alone, and there was no such thing as gay marriage. So their partner was never allowed. If they were in an ICU and dying and only family members could come in, they wouldn't let their partner in because they weren't married. So it could be a parent who rejected them for years showing up and they could go in, but the partner of the patient was forbidden. And this is like back in the day. And hopefully we're not going backwards too much. But that's a stunning object. You can look it up online too. It's just mind-boggling, because every little patch, someone makes it designed with the person's name and what they did and who loved them. So they weren't just blank patches. They were information about, so each one of those represented a person, not just a patch. Okay, next. So this was the next test of the value of transpersonal work. I mean, this was like the picture on the left, looking down the block from my office. That's what I saw. And I just remember the shock of looking down there, those buildings not being there, and thousands of people just disappeared. And then it took a long time for them to do the memorial. And I have to say, the blue lights represented the towers. And this memorial thing on the bottom is deep, like the depth of the bottom of the buildings. And it has the names of everybody that's been identified, carved around the base of the monument. And it took a really, really long time to create that. And there's still identifying bodies. And I know Richard felt so sad. There was a young guy that he worked with out here who wanted to be a fireman so badly. And he didn't think he was going to be able to go because he had some issues with drugs, and Richard worked with him and he taught him meditation and all of that. And he was able to get clean. And he finally became a fireman. He was so happy. A month later, he died. Where the neighborhood we were in, there were a few firehouses where they may have 30, 40 people. They were all dead. All the firehouses empty. And there were tags all over the city with pictures saying, have you seen this person? Have you seen this person? And I was across the street, my office was across the street from the hospital, and all the ambulances were ready to go. There was nothing to get. And there's people still today, someone we've been working with who has, cancer because he was down there. So next. So I'm going to finish this up by saying that this is the next crisis, that it became imperative to be able to work with people to find a place of higher consciousness and peace within themselves. And the local hospital here in Huntington was the epicenter of the AIDS, COVID, because every single unit in the hospital became a COVID ICU. So nurses who had been working in labor and delivery now were working in COVID ICU. And they were all like every day having a patient die, and the patient wasn't even able to have the family. And I remember one of the nurses saying, I can't believe there was one of the social workers would come around with the laptop so that the family could see person die. And it was beyond tragic. So that was re-energizing the desire more than ever. We had to start teaching online because of COVID. So we do virtual training now at this point, and had people from all over the country working and studying with us, wanting to learn how they can help people to work in a transpersonal way to deal with the losses that everybody was dealing with. So I think of transpersonal work as the essential thing that we need. Also, I worked extensively with people in recovery. And actually, my first book that included psychosynthesis was called Vulnerability Model and Healing Addictions. And it was a nursing book. Okay, next. And I just have another beautiful quote from this American who was another person who sought nature out. That's what he's famous for. He left and he went and lived in the woods and wrote about it. And that was his spiritual journey. Okay, next. And this is another one of Don's amazing photographs. Again, you can see the light coming through. Next. Okay, and another very powerful part of spiritual care, it's for so many people, it may be being in nature. And I have to say, these are two pictures I took. I was really working to feed butterflies in my garden. So that's definitely a safe place for so many people. Next. This is quite fascinating that there's actually, and you'll have a reference to it. There's actually a research thing that I found that demonstrates that people physiologically, if they love looking at water, their whole physiology changes. And it was a big study, and all of these people, their blood pressure went down significantly. And it doesn't have to be this kind of water. It can be a fountain. It can be. But I loved, because I was just working on the imagery chapter for the holistic book. I was so thrilled that I had actual research demonstrating this. Okay, next. And this is Monet's water lily painting. And I'll say the museum in New York, the Museum of Modern Art, there's a massive entire wall of this painting. It's like, 12 feet long. And I had a reporter that I was working with, and he'd had a lot of traumas in his experience, and that was where he went for peace. He said, I go into that room and it puts me into a total meditative state. So that's the power. We're talking about music, movement, art, all of these ways that people can find their place of peace and their connection to a higher self. Okay, next.
I believe that's it, Bonnie.
Yeah,
So I'm going to stop the share, Dr. Erickson.
Thank you.
I
Okay.
went over a little bit.
Oh, we started late, so I think you're right. Just perfect, Bonnie. So
Okay,
I'm gonna open it up to ask if people have questions or comments or ahas that went on when they saw some of the images. Um, there were some wonderful quotes that called to me, but I'm very curious or interested in hearing what unfolded for the rest of you. And please, we have Sonia Harden was clapping hands for you, Bonnie. We have two screens full of attendees, so please speak up because it's hard for me to see everybody. And I don't want to miss somebody because you're on the next screen. Kathleen, do you have something to share or ask or no, no. Okay, I don't mean to put you on the spot. It looked like you were going to say something. Let me ask a question of the group, whoever might be interested in answering. Was there an image or story that called to you? And if so, would you be willing to share it? Because we saw a lot of great images. Go ahead, Nancy Ruth.
Okay, so the picture of the owl really got to me, and I love nature and I love walking in the woods, and I have so many owl stories from experiencing owls in the woods. And so whenever I see an owl, it like triggers those incredible experiences I've had. And so that just really connected to me. I love that. And so thanks.
you're
Thank
welcome.
you.
I just wanted to add to that, that there are, like, especially in native traditions, there's sacred animals. And the other part of it is that, for like, my sister worked a lot with really just heart-wrenching kids who were in a treatment program, and she loved to teach them meditation and would have them do connect with a wisdom figure. And she'd always say, it could be whatever you want, that's going to help you. And she said it was so interesting. So many of the kids, these are like, they're all under 18 years old. They would have a bear, or there's some animal or a dog. And that was what they felt safe with. And it's so important to be wide open. And and she even had all these drawings they did, because they love to draw too. And they were just heartbreaking instances. And someone had clarified who the current I didn't get your name. Melina, did you want to say something about the person who was Veronica Iglesias? Is you still here?
Yeah, Malinali. Yes, I'm here. She's a curandera from Mexico City who lived in Albuquerque for about
Uh-huh,
3-4 years, and she went back to Yucatan. Now she's in Merida. She
uh-huh.
she got a chance to become a U.S. citizen, and she didn't. She said no. She went back to her home country. So
Uh-huh.
she's an amazing person. She taught me a lot. She gave me a they call a somador. It's a chalice looking instrument made out of clay, and you use it to burn copal.
Yeah.
And so she gifted me with one of that. She practices the tradición blanca, the white tradition, and I practice the tradición
Uh-huh.
uh, roja. So there's like 4 different traditions in Mexico: the white, the red, the black, and the what's the other one? Blue. So
Uh-huh.
she practices the white tradition. So I hope to go visit her very soon for Christmas, for the December 12th holiday that we have there, the Virgen de Guadalupe, which we call Tonantzin Coatlicue in the Nahuatl language. Thank you.
Uh-huh.
Thank you, Anna.
Thank you.
Bonnie, Jen Velo says the story of you becoming present with your patient and asking her, what are you hoping for, was powerful. Thank you for sharing. I found that an amazing story too, because as we're taking our last breath, we still can have hope, and nurses can facilitate that hope with something as simple as a few words. That was a very powerful story. Thank you.
I mean, my first job in nursing, it was like a blessing. And now, now she's been living on the West Coast for a long time, and now she's living real close to me. So we've reconnected, Kathy Faslow, and she traveled all over the world teaching people about hospice. Thank you,
Gifts
Margaret.
come around, don't they?
Yes.
Dana Ryan says, absolutely wonderful, Bonnie. Thank you so much. I'm wondering if you could repeat what the study was that you mentioned regarding looking at water and decreasing stress.
We're going to send out the doc, right? We can send out the document to everybody. I took all of the pictures and I put it onto a document. And so I'll have a few notes about what each picture was. And at the end, I have the reference. Let me see.
Can you speak conceptually or an overview about that? What the meaning of that experience was, or how the water and stress were related? Excuse me.
Are you in the study? Is that what you're asking? Oh, it was all different. It was actually a study that was done in a botanical garden in England. And they had different people with different experiences. And the emphasis was also that it's, not everybody likes water, okay? But people who do, that it resonates in a very biological way. And the other thing I didn't, it says it decreases in blood pressure and heart rate with increased subjective level of relaxation while viewing water compared with adjacent ground. So it's the Journal of Environmental Psychology. And we'll send you the link. And yeah.
It's interesting because we all start in the water. We all begin our journey in a water source or a swimming pool. And so, unless we're traumatized, usually it's a positive experience. Marcy?
Yeah, thank you so much, Bonnie. I don't think there was a slide or a story that didn't resonate in some way. I definitely love the what are you hoping for and how that resonated for me, but also some of the quotes, like I know you said you were sending it out, but I still wrote down the quote, self-realization is the direct personal experience of the aspect of you that is identical to the energy of the universe, and how poignant that is. Especially how off-centered in so many ways we've been feeling lately. Many of us have been feeling lately, how often I try to ground myself and center in a more positive light, so that I can hopefully shift not just my energy, but the energy of around me and have it ripple out. And when you were sharing about the pandemic, I mean, that was definitely something that I brought with me when I was working on the floors in a hospital during the pandemic. Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah.
So thank you for that. I love that quote. It's just such a wonderful way to tie it all together.
Thank you. Well, I mean, for me to start this work at the beginning of AIDS was just unfathomable. It was, nobody knew what was going on. And the hatred. I mean, the hatred because it was like gay cancer. I mean, what a monstrous thing. And people were losing their jobs if they were gay, because if they're gay, they're going to catch it. And you try to, no, you don't, you don't catch it if someone sneezes on you. It was the amount of ignorance was just stunning. And I will just quickly say, when I was teaching, I was teaching at the College of New Rochelle, and I brought my students down to my office, and we would go to this Manhattan Center for Living, where it was a free center for people with AIDS, because they were all, they needed a community. They needed that. And I remember I was teaching them imagery and meditation, and then I had them do that, do an image. We had a big circle of guys, not everybody, but maybe it was like 15. And then there wasn't all guys. Because at some point they also, because IV drug users were getting HIV, then some people were coming in. And they said, how am I going to do that? I wanted them to do what are you hoping for with the group. And they thought, really, you know? And what was so touching about it was that we didn't have, when you do a group, you don't have everybody all talk at once. I had them go off into little pods with each other, and the information they got from these people, they were so moved by the imagery. And I'll say that it was also a self-selected group, because they were coming for help. It was a free service, but they wanted to understand about meditation. And there was somebody who was doing some acupuncture, and they had a wonderful kitchen where it was completely vegan, holistic food, and everybody was able to get a full meal, which was amazing. And it was supported by donations. But one of the things I remember, the students were blown away. There was this young woman, she was probably about 20, and she had been a heroin addict, and she had just come out of jail. Okay, but she was HIV positive. And the nurse who was processing with the small group that she was in, the girl wanted to tell the whole group what her experience was. And she said, I just want you to know that it was so important for me, because I got an image. And what I was hoping for was that when I was dying, that I could say, Mom, I'm straight. She wanted to be able to reassure her mother that she'd really, I mean, it's going to bring tears to my eyes again. I mean, we were just, it was so brave of her to say that. She said, all the suffering I put my parents through, all the suffering. And then I came out of jail, and I've been clean, and people here have been helping me. And if I'm dying, I want her to know that I'm clean. So that's a surprise, right?
Well, we never understand other people's worldviews unless we're able to try to listen, and they
Yeah.
trust us enough to share their vulnerability.
Yeah.
Harry, and you're muted, so thank you.
Thank you. I think you just really, the image that really touched me, and I think you've done such a beautiful job weaving these stories, was the one where there was the woman was holding the light, and it was the quote about fear, because so much of what you've shared over the years is all the different sort of experiences we as nurses have being present to fear and grief. And just by being present and offering, you know, a simple question, whether we ask it out loud or we're sharing ourselves in a different way with people, we are bringing sort of, even if it's just a moment of antidote of hope, because that's one of the antidotes to helping people while they're present to grief. And I think just our society is pervasively grieving right now, and we're seeing all the different phases of grieving, from anger to, you know, to that, like, it's pervasive. And I just that image with the woman holding the light just really felt powerful to me. So thank you.
Thank you, Kari.
All right, and the other thing about holding the light, just a second, Kelly, is to me, when you ask that question of hope, you are bringing light, energetic light to the situation. And we're going to go with Kelly, and then you have some comments, Bonnie. I want to make sure you see in the chat. Go
Okay.
ahead, Kelly.
Oh, thank you, Margaret. Thank you so much, Bonnie. And I just wanted to share that as a nurse who has participated in class with Bonnie and Richard and their team, Mary Beth and Debbie and Bonnie's sister, it was the most beautiful experience. You will see 3 whole weekends at least, all more imagery than that, and sacred art and their story and our work together and asking those questions and so many more from the work that we did together, that we practiced with each other, that we were all transformed. This group of nurses, such a healing experience and spiritual experience. So I just wanted to share that and recommend their courses.
Thank you, Kelly. Okay.
You're on mute, Dr. Erickson.
Thanks. Thank you, Bonnie. I too love the story about what are you hoping for. I will definitely remember that when I have the opportunity to assist someone in their transition period. Thank you. And I think that the power of that statement can be used in any transition period. You could use it with a student who is failing a class. You can use it with a child who comes home and has had a bad day. I think that is an incredibly powerful tool that you provided amongst many others, Bonnie, that is something that everybody can hold on to and can be incredibly powerful and actually transformative. Thank you. There's also thank you for the time, effort, and expertise. I'm grateful for the opportunity to be here with you and be part of your shared presentation. This is from Angelica. I think it is wonderful experience that comes from what are you hoping for? Quite insightful and a shared transpersonal experience as an outcome from this. Like stated, we are always in hope of something, even in time of death. This is wonderful.
Yeah.
And Toyoko said, thank you so much for beautiful pictures and quotes and stories behind them. I feel transpersonal nursing is the core of holistic nursing.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
I feel so passionate about it right now too. And we're even going to resume teaching psychosynthesis because it's like, we need it now. we need this expanded vision so that we can be taking care of ourselves and the people we love and being open. So yeah, it just feels like it's very, very important right now.
Timely.
Yeah. Yes.
Are there other questions or comments? It is going on 7:30 Eastern Standard Time. And I just wanted to check and see if there's any other comments or questions or thoughts before we close for the evening. I don't want to leave anybody out. So I invite you all to think of ask yourself, what are you hoping for as you go into tomorrow and you go into the next week and the coming months. We know that there are challenges as life brings us all the time, but that also means there are opportunities. And
Yes.
I want to say thank you all for coming on a Tuesday evening. I know you're tired, but we are thrilled to have had you attend. This is being recorded and it will be available online. For those of you who are certified with HNCC, you will receive 1.5 continuing competency hours for your attendance that can go towards the continuing competency requirement for credentialing. And I invite Bonnie to look at all the chats because
Yeah.
there are so many thank yous and affirmations for the work you do, the lives you change. And so with that, I say thank you we hope some of you or all of you will join us for the April, I think it's April 22nd. And yes, it's April 22nd, and it is a panel with presenters from 3 different cultural backgrounds. One is Irish, one is Wiccan, and one is Hispanic, and they're talking about the rituals of spring and welcoming spring. And with that, I say thank you, and I wish you all a good night. Good night. You will be getting the information sent as noted by Bonney. Bye-bye, everyone.